if you look at where life is most abundant on Earth, both human life and plant and animal life, it's actually in the warmer parts, in the tropics. There's no 20 million person cities north of the Arctic Circle. They're all in the tropics. And the burgeoning, critters and bugs and plants are in the equator, not in Antarctica or the Arctic. So the idea that warmth or heat is sometimes dangerous, I suppose you mentioned the Arizona desert. Sure, that could be dangerous, but air conditioning fixed that. I think of Al Gore, where the planet is boiling. It's on fire. I really think they've resorted to almost like science fiction terminology to scare us. I think they've done a number on us. I think there's a whole generation of kids who are growing up just the way our generation was maybe afraid of nuclear mutually assured destruction. And I think there was a basis for that fear. Maybe I'm wrong. I think that we've conditioned an entire era of school children to be terrified of the planet warming a fraction of a degree. I mean, boiling, fires. I think we've done a number on our own kids.
I agree. And I would think of that as it's sort of the second point. So the first point about climate is mastery is what matters most. And that should make us suspicious of this movement. The people claim to care about the livability of climate, that they ignore mastery. They don't seem to care about mastery when that makes all the difference. They say, I'm so concerned about the poor world. Let's have them use less energy so somehow the climate will be nicer to them, versus let's get them energy so they can protect themselves as well as we can. So there's this one element of ignoring mastery. But then the other thing that should be suspicious is what you're raising, which is the demonizing of warmth. I don't know if it's thermophobia or what, maybe there's a term for it. But yeah, if you just think from a human perspective, and I'm stressing that for a reason, because I think it's ultimately an anti-human philosophy that causes people to ignore mastery and to have a fear of any and hatred of any kind of human change, including warmth. If you just look at it common sense, and somebody had told people in 1920, hey, you know what? In 100 years, the global climate system is going to be about 1 degree Celsius warmer. It's about 2 degrees Fahrenheit for Americans. And that warming is going to be mostly concentrated in older regions of the earth. And it's going to be more at night, and it's going to be more in the winter. What would they say? And you're going to have a lot more CO2 for plants. Like, are they really going to think, oh my God, how could we live through that? Like, they'd probably think, well, that might actually be good. There's going to be a lot of benefits to that, a lot fewer cold-related deaths. And it turns out many times more people die from cold than from heat now, let alone back then. So you would just think, like, it's either no big deal or it could even be better. And so what you get is people are acting like mastery doesn't exist. And they're acting like warmth is a catastrophe when it's kind of obviously not, particularly with mastery, but even on its own, it's pretty obviously not. And so there's this question of what is behind this. And I talk about this a lot in my book, Fossil Future. And what's behind it is ultimately that people at best are not looking at climate from a pro-human perspective. Because from a pro-human perspective, the project of using fossil fuels to master climate and creating some warming as a side effect isn't an incredibly pro-climate project from a human perspective. And so ultimately, it's that they're looking at it from an impact is evil perspective, or what I call it, the anti-impact framework. So it's the view that it's wrong for us to impact nature, and our number one goal should be to eliminate our impact on nature. And if you view climate that way, you think our number one goal for climate shouldn't be make it livable. No. Our number one goal should just be to not impact it. Then from that perspective, who cares if we can master it? That's not the goal. The goal is just to not impact it. And then if you believe the goal is to not impact climate, then everything we've done to climate is evil. And even though we're 50 times safer from death than we were 100 years ago, we made it worse. So it's all about the moral standard. Is your standard advancing human flourishing on Earth, in which case we've made the climate better, or is it eliminating human impact on Earth, in which case we've made the climate worse?
I can't help but think as you're talking that, you and I have grown up in North America, so we probably had air conditioning for decades. I mean, I remember when it was still sort of an option in a car, a basic car, to get air conditioning. Now it's pretty standard. I think air conditioning, just the climate solutions, climate mastery is completely ubiquitous, and it really always has been. I'm not saying there aren't some people who can't afford an air conditioner in hot places, but I guess what I'm saying is I feel like the places that have had the greatest change in their ability to master the climate are not California or Canada, but India, China, places that have gone from zero to, let's say, people who have come so far compared to us. Yes, we're wealthier than ever, but we had a good starting point, let's say 50 years ago. I guess what I'm saying is I think that global warming fear-mongering is a luxury good primarily in the West that has benefited from climate mastery. I think of Greta Thunberg as the absolute epitome of that. Someone who hasn't had a tough day in their entire life, someone who lives in a northern country who benefits from climate mastery every day. She can afford to have a school strike, even though she's in her 20s now. She can afford to pout about energy because she's not someone in India, China, Indonesia, Africa trying to rise up. I think the global warming mindset is a luxury good for spoiled Westerners. What do you think?
I think it's an element of that. There's an element of that. I mean, if you look at somebody like Greta, I think there has to be some empathy as well, because people are they're given so much catastrophe in their upbringing. So it's weird because they're taught that the best earth ever to live on is the worst earth ever. And Greta becomes less innocent by the day because she's now an adult. But you just think, people have this legitimate fear, and they have this it's not actually based on anything, but it's real fear, particularly for the younger people. I think the older people, not nearly as much. It's real fear. And they just think it's a transgression. They really think it's immoral to impact the earth, and in particular, impact the climate. But yeah, it is, in fact, it's true. It's a luxury. And you can see this with the actual emphasis that people place on climate change. You would think that, hey, in African nations, regular people would be so concerned about climate change that it allegedly hurts them the most. And in a sense, any negative element of climate change will, of course, hurt the poor the most, because everything negative hurts the poor the most, because to be poor means to have less mastery. That's ultimately what it is. To have fewer resources, that means you have fewer capabilities, which means you have less mastery. But in practice, people in those nations, they want things like education, food, shelter, et cetera. A friend of mine that I've had some influence over, a guy named Jasper Machogu, who people can find on Twitter, he has a pretty entertaining Twitter account. And what he does is, because he's grown up in a manual labor world in Kenya, like he'll just show videos of like, hey, this is what we do every day. And he has a really good motto, which is just stop toil. So not just stop oil, just stop toil. And the key is you stop toil via fossil fuels, which allow you to use more machines. And he's actually been like bringing electricity and stuff and water to communities. But like he has, I think, the attitude that many do, particularly that many would if they understood the issue better, which is like, why are you talking about small changes in temperature when we're focused on eating and education and all of these other things, and sanitation and healthcare that require a lot more energy? So it is in that sense very much a luxury belief, but it's not simply a luxury. Like if you own a Maybach or something like that, you're not doing that at the expense of other people, right? There are probably poorer people who are employed to make the Maybach, and maybe you have somebody.
That's an excerpt from the Ezra Levant Show. I'm Ezra Levant, and every weekday I do a monologue about the most interesting subject in the news. Then I interview a fascinating guest. Could be a politician, could be an activist, could be someone from overseas. Then I read a little bit of fan mail and a little bit of hate mail and do it again the next day. My friend Sheila Gunn-Reid does a weekly show too. You can get both by going to rebelnewsplus.com. I think it's the most interesting content you'll find in Canada.